All right, my friends, thanks for joining me. I can't believe it's another school year already. And this is one of my favorite classes to teach, the Bible as literature. So we're going to start by taking a couple of videos just to talk about how the Bible is like other literature and how it is not like other literature. So we'll compare and contrast between those two ideas, and we'll see what it is that we're going to be trying to learn in the coming year. So, just to compare scripture with other forms of literature, this is how they are alike. They share the same respect for historical context. So, if you are reading a book of history, they are careful to tell you about events in a chronological and historical way, and Scripture does the same thing. It uses the same grammatical structure that other books do. So it's not a warm, fuzzy, spiritual sort of language that has a scratch and sniff section to make you feel better about it. It's the same grammar structure as you would find in some of the great works of literature. Has the same rules of interpretation. So the way in which you might interpret Yeats' Second Coming of Christ is the same kind of rules for interpretation that you might use for Psalm. So we're learning the rules of interpretation that are really true for any literature, for any work of art. And so lots of the things that we will learn in this class will be readily transferable to what you do with Shakespeare's plays, with Shakespeare's sonnets, that kind of thing. And um, Another point of comparison is they use the same literary genre. So scripture doesn't create its own genre necessarily. It uses the genres that were extant at the time and that we still understand. Let me explain how some of these work. I said it's the same historical context. So it grows out of a particular historical context. Time period is important. Culture is important. Scripture has three distinct languages to it: Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic. And so we'll be paying attention to that. And Scripture has what we'll call an unfolding narrative. As we move along chronologically, we see that each of the stages are rooted in history. So we're going to respect the historical context of the passages that we take a look at. And then there is a grammatical context. Scripture uses the same rules regarding words and sentences. Let me just say that when we're talking about words and their meanings, oftentimes words have all sorts of uh, different shades of meaning. So if I want to use the word say or speak, there are all kinds of words that share the same relative meaning but may have like a difference in nuance. Like if I say the word say or told or speak, I could also say whisper. I could also say shout, and they are all voice, they're all communication, they all share a similar meaning, so that's a common semantic range, but they have different shades of meaning as well. So when a word is used in scripture or in any literary context, the meaning will be in the sentence. Once you get the sentence fixed, then the words in the sentence, you know what the meaning is for that word. So it's not quite as legitimate to look at all the different ranges of meanings in words. Once the words are in a sentence, you figure out which one goes with the sentence, and that will set the meaning in the text. So we'll be looking at, don't get excited about this part. We'll look at grammatical context, and we'll learn how to interpret scripture. And the rules are the same whether we're doing it with scripture or, as I said, with Shakespeare or um, other famous authors as well. Same rules: observation, interpretation, application, and Meaning is always rooted, we're going to say, in authorial intent. So we're taking the position that for me to objectively find the meaning in any text, I have to know what the author meant. It's not good enough for me to say, well, I think it means this, and then you can say the direct opposite thing, and we can both go, we're both right. It's not meaning rooted in the reader. It's meaning rooted in the author, the person who sent the letter, who wrote the text, who told the story, who made the psalm. All right, so that's how we'll play with not only historical, but grammatical context. Here are some of the rules that we'll use for interpretation. We're going to understand that when we talk about interpreting Scripture literally, we do take into account figures of speech. So if Scripture says he hides us beneath his wings, it doesn't mean that God has wings. It's a figure of speech. So we'll recognize the figures of speech. We'll recognize the kind of genre that we're talking about, and then that will give us the understanding of the text itself. And as we've already said, meaning will reside not in the text, not in the reader, but in the author. We have the text, but we will be able to look at the text, compare Scripture with Scripture, and we will reach back to see, and as much as we can rebuild what the text says as designed by the author, that's where we want to get. We want to get to understanding what the author meant in his context, and then we'll have the interpretation. We'll have lots of application along the way, just as we would with any other work of literature. And in that case, we're trying to figure out how to apply it to our own lives. But for the interpretation, for the meaning of the text, we've got to get back to the author. And then finally, we're going to be paying attention to literary genres. In particular, in Scripture, there are all kinds of different genres, and we need to respect them. So a genre is a category of literature determined by technique or tone or length or content. Sometimes we have like a historical narrative in which you're just telling the story of what happened, and it runs chronologically, and it tells the story in ways that we would expect a story to go. There are forms that we will call epistles. They're letters, and so they will follow the form that we regularly understand to be a letter, to be an epistle. We'll look at poetry, we'll look at wisdom, we'll look at drama and gospel and prophetic literature and apocalyptic literature. All of these have their own insights into what the author is attempting to communicate, and respect and understanding of the genre that's there will help us to better understand what it is we're reading. Does that make sense? So those are some of the ways in which we'll approach the interpretation of Scripture, because it's almost exactly the same as we would use for any other work of literature. So in our next video, we'll take a look at some of the ways in which Scripture is not like other works of literature. So stay tuned. I'm glad to have you along for the ride this year.